From the opinion pages of the Wall Street Journal, this is Potomac Watch.
Louisiana passes a law to require the 10 Commandments be posted in every public school and university classroom, drawing a lawsuit from the American Civil Liberties Union. Plus, as primary voters go to the polls in Utah, Colorado, and New York, will the Squad lose one of its loudest members, Congressman Jamal Bowman? Welcome, I'm Kyle Peterson with the Wall Street Journal. We are joined today by my colleagues, columnist Kim Strassel and editorial board member Kate Batchelder Odell. Louisiana Governor Jeff Landry last week signed a bill called HB 71. Here is a piece of what it says. No later than January 1st, 2025, each public school governing authority shall display the 10 Commandments in each classroom in each school under its jurisdiction. It shall be on a poster or a framed document that is at least 11 inches by 14 inches. And then it provides a specific text of a version of the 10 Commandments that looks to my eye like it is based on the King James Version. Let's start with a clip of Governor Landry on Fox News, arguing that there is no separation of church and state in the First Amendment.
I challenge anyone who says that to go find me those words in the First Amendment. They don't exist. It's a metaphor that was breathed into the First Amendment by a liberal Supreme Court in the 1930s. And so again, this nation, look at all of the documents. All of the founding documents of this nation were based upon Judeo-Christian principles. We've got it on our money. We've got it all over our Capitol. We have it in the Supreme Court. It is those that want to extract that out of the foundation of this country that really and truly want to create the chaos that ultimately is the demise of this nation.
And here is Donald Trump on Saturday at the Faith and Freedom Coalition's conference endorsing the idea.
Who likes the 10 Commandments, by the way, going up in the schools? They think it's such a bad thing. I said, has anyone read the thou shalt not steal, has anybody read this incredible stuff? It's just incredible. They don't want it to go up. It's a crazy world, a crazy world.
Kim, what do you make of this idea? And do you suppose that Louisiana is maybe going to have a problem with the Supreme Court?
It could very well have a problem with the Supreme Court. The first thing to note is that the Roberts Court has actually been very good to the cause of religious liberty. And that might be what some of those who are supporting this 10 Commandment law are thinking, is that they've got a good shot here at the court. We also have some opinions in the past that do not outright forbid religious monuments, for instance, or religious expressions in public places. We have American Legion versus American Humanists 7-2, which found that Maryland did not have to remove a 32-foot cross that was built a long time ago to honor the dead in the Great War, or the First World War, as we call it. They do note that the First Amendment prohibits the establishment of religion, but that's not necessarily what's going on here with a 100-year-old monument that it was meant to honor the dead. There's another opinion that was written back by Anthony Kennedy, who's since retired, about the town of Greece. This was in 2014, and its tradition of opening its town meetings with a prayer, and again found that that was a tradition and does not coerce participation. We do have a case, though, that does say that there is an issue with posting the 10 Commandments in the school, and it was an actual statute, and the court found unconstitutional that statute requiring the posting of them, finding that to require it was improper and plainly for religious purpose and therefore impermissible. And those who are down there right now in Louisiana saying, oh, well, this is a little different. I mean, this is just a historical document we're putting up, and, it's no different than the Mayflower Compact or the Declaration of Independence. Those are not actually required in class. So I think that that's a key distinction. But this gets to the fine line that the Supreme Court has attempted to draw here, which is, I think, in my mind, would be the distinction between displays of religion that come about because people of tradition or because an individual joins with them. Essentially, the court saying you cannot erase religion from public life. but it does have a history of being a lot more stern on questions when government attempts to require religious symbols or religious procedures in a public area.
Kate, what's your view of this? I think it's important to point out that we have a pretty conservative and originalist Supreme Court now that is doing some cleanup of old decisions, including one on the Establishment Clause called the Lemon Test. On the other hand, that 1980 opinion on posting the Ten Commandments in public schools is directly on point. And I'm skeptical that there is maybe a majority of the Supreme Court that wants to reverse that, particularly given the context of what is going on in Louisiana. And I think that the justices may distinguish some of the cases that Kim was citing on religious symbols. There's another one in 2005 called Van Orden v. Perry, and that was a Supreme Court that upheld a Ten Commandments monument on the 22 acres surrounding the Texas state capitol that contained 17 monuments and 21 historical markers. And the Supreme Court there said that even though the Ten Commandments monument had religious content, that did not constitute the state of Texas establishing a religion. But I think they may distinguish that from what's happening in Louisiana. And particularly, I would point to some remarks by the sponsor of this Ten Commandments bill in the Louisiana State House, State Representative Dodie Horton. Here is what she said during this debate. She said, "Given all the junk our children are exposed to in classrooms today, it's imperative that we put the Ten Commandments back in a prominent position." She said that her bill would post them in every classroom, quote, "for our children to look up and see what God says is right and what he says is wrong," unquote. And so that is quoted by this lawsuit now that is coming from the ACLU, which is making the argument that this is treading a little bit into a state establishment. And the lawsuit argues that this law, quote, unconstitutionally pressures students into religious observance, veneration, and adoption of the state's favored religious scripture, unquote. And Kate, now I'll get off my soapbox and let you respond.
Well, I guess I'll, play the other side briefly for a moment. I don't think that Louisiana has come up here with a case that will be particularly attractive to the courts for some reasons that we've already laid out here. But I do think that the Establishment Clause had a specific meaning at the time it was written, and that established churches by states at that time, compelled financial support, compelled attendance, punished dissenters. I do think that fixed meaning is important to keep in mind because over time, the jurisprudence on this question, with some correction that you just described, has often interpreted the Establishment Clause to mean that religion has to be banished from public life in all forms. Now, on the other hand, I really think the fatal problem with this Louisiana measure is that it is so prescriptive about what must be displayed. For example, Ten Commandments are obviously a non-sectarian document, and they contributed a lot of the moral furniture of the Western mind. So it's an important document to, I think, the country's founding, to Western civilization. And I think you can make an argument for including it prominently in school curriculum. Now, I think the giveaway here, though, is that the law, not only does it say you have to post this translation of it that, for instance, is not from the Hebrew Bible that the Jews follow, but you also don't necessarily have to display these other important historical documents that also make up a huge parts of the U.S. national heritage. For example, you can optionally display the Mayflower Compact. You can optionally display the Declaration of Independence. Another option is the Northwest Ordinance. As a Michigander, I've thought about posting that in my own house. But it's not just simply saying these are a suite of important documents, the precepts of which are important to public education and producing students who are prepared to govern themselves. It is elevating one particular translation of the commandments and for what seems like an expressly religious purpose. Again, does that qualify as compelled worship? I think that's an open question. I think the three-pronged test that the court undid with Lemon, I think that was a mess. But I do think what is going on here is mostly a provocative effort on Louisiana's part, where it does not have the hallmarks of a law that looks well executed, that looks likely to prevail in court, and looks like it's really trying to think about the role of these documents in public education.
Hang tight. We'll be right back in a moment. Welcome back. Let me add just a little bit more historical context to this conversation. So the First Amendment says, Congress shall make no law respecting an establishment of religion. And let me read a few lines about what that meant from the book Agreeing to Disagree. This is co-written by former federal judge Michael McConnell, who is an expert on religious liberty. He says, when those words were added to the Constitution, every American lawyer and probably every citizen knew what they meant. As British subjects, Americans had long lived under the church bylaw established. When the First Amendment was adopted in 1791, roughly half the states still maintain some form of establishment of religion. These are the things that Kate was talking about, for example, compulsory attendance, compulsory tithes. And after the First Amendment, which was originally binding only on the federal government and not on the states, again, back to Agreeing to Disagree, the book says the last state establishment of religion in Massachusetts was formally dismantled in 1833. The term establishment of religion thus passed from usage. Today, it has no reference outside of constitutional law. So that provides a little bit more of a context of what the founders were thinking. And maybe this question of this Louisiana law is coming to Supreme Court near you. But to the point that Kate made about whether this is a well-executed law, I also have my doubts there. And part of what we have seen in recent decades in the education space is an increased focus in many states, but particularly red states, on student choice, parental choice, family choice. And another way to go about this, to my mind, Kim, is not to try to put the text of the Ten Commandments on a poster in every public school classroom where it will sit there and be looked at or not looked at and not really discussed in the public classroom curriculum, but to offer increased school choice. And so parents who really want to get the Ten Commandments and for real, not just on a poster, can take that state tax money that they're paying, that local tax money, and have that money follow their students, follow their children to a school of their choice, which may be a religious school, a Catholic school, a Jewish school, an evangelical school, and let 1,000 flowers bloom.
Absolutely. And that is one of the mysteries of Louisiana's decision to pass this law, because it did it simultaneously with a bit of really great news out of Louisiana, which is that the governor also signed a bill for educational savings accounts, basically universal school choice in Louisiana. Now, it's going to take some years for it to phase in, but ultimately it should touch to every single Louisiana student. I would just note that it's a state that really needs it too. It's had some very poor educational outcomes by comparison to other states for quite some time now. And so this is the other way to go, especially because, to your point, Kyle, as the Supreme Court has tried to be less hostile to organized religion. And I think that that is the way to think of the direction that the court has been going. It hasn't been radical, it's been incremental, but it's been a clear desire to put up some roadblocks against those who have been using the courts to attempt to, as Kate said, banish religion from the public sphere. And so it has issued some rulings that have suggested that there really is a place for school choice dollars to follow kids that go to private schools that engage in religion. And that was a big fight that had been going on, but the court has signaled that that is something that is allowable. There was a case regarding Maine only a couple of years ago where this was a big issue. There'll probably be some more direct challenges. This has been the legacy of the court, and I think that that's important to remember. Just one more thing that I think makes it a little tough for Louisiana in this Ten Commandments law here, which is, if you look at the court, it has been, under this majority, been dismantling some of that hostility. And we saw 2 years ago, we keep talking about the Lemon Test. The Lemon Test is something that had been adopted by a prior court, and it essentially had this three-part function that essentially said that government can assist with religion, but only in these very limited purposes, subject to these different tests. That got dismantled back in 2022 with a case that had to do with Coach Joseph Kennedy, who the court found had a constitutional right to pray at the 50-yard line after games, even though some of his students joined with him. And Neil Gorsuch wrote that opinion. And what I really liked about it is one of the big issues there was, well, did people feel compelled to join the coach, in particular his influenceable students. And what Gorsuch wrote was that no, actually seeing other people engage in religion is part of living in a pluralistic society. You can choose to join or not, but we're not going to simply say that people cannot engage in their faith publicly. I think that's been much more of the direction of the court that has been going, saying we're not going to excise from the public sphere any monument and any display of religion. That's not our job here. But asking the court, even though it has essentially eviscerated the Lemon test, asking it to directly contravene a direct holding like the one that it had back in that 1980 case in which it said, no, you cannot compel the Ten Commandments in classroom, that might be a bit much to ask this court to do.